My name is Morgan Blake. I'm 40 years old, and today I stand silently at the back of my younger brother, Jake Blake's Navy SEAL graduation ceremony, dressed in civilian clothes, unnoticed by the family who believes I washed out of the military years ago. The irony, I'm actually a colonel in Air Force Special Operations, leading intelligence teams on missions that never make the news. For national security reasons, my entire career has remained classified. As I scan the crowd taking in proud families and crisp uniforms, my eyes lock with Jake's commanding general. His gaze widens in instant recognition. In that moment, everything I've hidden for over a decade threatens to surface in ways I never planned for. I grew up in San Diego, daughter of Navy Captain Thomas Blake, in a house where the ocean was worshipped like a deity. Every wall carried traces of my father's glory. Day's brass plaques, engraved with squadrons and battles, old photographs of men in pressed uniforms, standing on steel decks under endless skies. Our dinner table was a war room. Discussions of maritime strategy mixed with stories of deployments in the Gulf or the Pacific, and my father's voice would swell with pride as he spoke. Jake always sat forward, chin on his palm, eyes bright, absorbing every syllable like gospel. I listened too. God, I listened harder than anyone. But when my father's eyes fell on me, his gaze softened into dismissal. Morgan has a sharp mind, he told his Navy friends over beer and cigar smoke. But she lacks discipline for real service. I was 14 when I heard him say that. His voice, casual and unfeeling, carved through me like a blade slipped under the ribs. That night I sat on my bedroom floor cross-legged beside my window, watching aircraft lights blink across the dark sky. I swore an oath to myself in silence. I will prove him wrong. So I trained. I ran 5 miles every morning before dawn, lungs screaming against the ocean chill. I studied his old naval tactics books until diagrams blurred and strategy terms filled my dreams. My body hardened, my mind sharpened, and when I was accepted into the Naval Academy, my hands shook with joy, so intense it bordered on pain. My father hugged me that day, a rare, tight embrace that lasted only seconds, but felt monumental. "Don't waste this opportunity," he said, his voice gruff with an emotion he'd never name. At the academy, I thrived. Strategy courses felt like breathing. I ran obstacle courses until my muscles failed, then ran them again. My instructors called me ruthless in pursuit of mastery. But during my 3rd year, as I sat alone one evening, reviewing intelligence simulations in the library, 2 men in dark suits approached. They introduced themselves, quietly flashing credentials I recognized immediately, but could never name aloud. Intelligence recruitment officers. They knew my scores, my psychological evaluations, my aptitude in asymmetric warfare analysis. They offered me a choice I never expected: leave the academy to enter a program so classified its existence was denied even to Congress. But it came with a condition: complete secrecy. I would vanish from the Naval Academy. The cover story was simple and devastating. She washed out. Many talented candidates don't make it, they assured. No one will question it. I signed without hesitation, believing one day my family would learn the truth and see what I had become. I couldn't have been more wrong. When I first came home under my new cover, my mother wouldn't meet my eyes. She set a plate before me in silence, lips pressed thin. "I just don't understand how you could throw it all away," she whispered as she folded napkins into crisp triangles. My father didn't yell. He didn't rage. He simply stopped speaking to me. When relatives asked about his children, his voice would brighten as he spoke of Jake now, at the academy himself. When they asked about me, he would pause, shrug, and change the subject. Thanksgiving dinners turned into endurance tests. Jake would announce his latest achievements: top tactical student advanced training selection, and my mother's eyes would shine with pride so bright it could burn through steel. Meanwhile, my cousin Melanie, smug behind her wine glass, would ask still at that boring insurance job Morgan. I'd nod, swallowing the lie like glass shards. Still there. Good benefits, I guess she'd smirk, her tone dripping with pity. They never knew that while they slept safely at night, I was slipping across borders under false names, gathering intelligence that prevented attacks they'd never hear about. They never knew about the Silver Star awarded to me in a windowless room for decisions under fire that saved a dozen lives in Syria, or the commendations locked away in vaults rather than framed on living room walls. Each of their careless dismissals cut me open again, but I bled silently and kept moving. The training that forged me into what I am today took place in a compound with no name on any map. Days began at 0400. Physical punishment was only the foundation. The real war was waged in classrooms and simulation chambers where sleep deprivation blurred the edges of reality as we processed crisis-level intelligence in real time. Morgan, your mind works differently. My instructor, Major Lawrence, once told me, after I restructured an intelligence grid others deemed hopeless. You see patterns where others see chaos. By my 4th year, I led intelligence teams across 3 continents. My specialty was extracting information from places traditional spies could not operate: black sites, conflict zones, crumbling warlord regimes. The secret begins. I still remember the night they came for me. It was late. The academy library smelled of old paper and floor polish, deserted except for the faint squeak of my chair as I shifted hunched over tactical intelligence simulations that no longer challenged me. My eyelids burned from 16 straight hours of study, but I kept reading, chasing something I couldn't name. Perhaps approval, perhaps the feeling of enoughness I'd never tasted. That's when I saw them. 2 men in black suits approaching silently across the marble floor. Their eyes were calm, their movements efficient, predatory in their control. My heart slammed once hard like a warning siren in an empty city. Morgan Blake. Yes, sir. Walk with us. Outside, the February air clawed at my skin. They led me to a dark sedan idling under shadow. One man opened the door for me. The other climbed in after. The cabin smelled faintly of leather and gun oil. He handed me a folder with no markings. Inside were pages of test results, psychological analyses, and field evaluation scores I didn't know existed. Your mind works differently, he said. Your strategic assessments, your pattern recognition under stress, your loyalty index. You are ideal for what we do. I read the header. Office of Special Reconnaissance and Tactical Intelligence Operations. A name that meant nothing and everything. But why me? I whispered, my voice trembling from exhaustion, adrenaline, and the possibility blooming within me like a bruise. Because we don't need cadets who graduate with honors. We need weapons that think. His eyes locked onto mine, unblinking. You will leave the academy immediately. Your record will show that you were dismissed. This program does not exist. Your life from this point forward will be classified at the highest levels. I felt the world tilt beneath me. All those mornings before dawn, the sweat, the blood, the brutal hours spent shaping myself into the daughter my father could respect, all of it, burned down in a second. Dismissed as in, I washed out. It's the cleanest cover. Men fail here. No one will question it. But my family, they'll think. They'll think what they need to think. You're a soldier. You don't need them to understand. I signed the papers with hands that no longer felt like mine. That night, I sat alone in my dorm room, staring at the photos pinned to my corkboard tactical team drills. War Theory Debate Awards, a candid of me running the O course at dawn, sweat glistening down my back like armor. I pulled each pin out one by one, placed the photos face down, and slid them into the folder marked Top Secret. My body shook so hard I couldn't stand. I pressed my palms to my knees and forced myself to breathe. I believed it was worth it. That someday my father would open the door and see who I'd become. That someday my mother's eyes would soften with pride instead of disappointment. That someday Jake would look at me and see a hero. I didn't know then how wrong I was. When I returned home under my new cover story, the lie fell from my mouth like rotting teeth. I didn't make it. My mother's lips thinned to a single bloodless line. She turned away, wiping invisible crumbs from the counter. "Your father pulled strings to get you in," she whispered. "I didn't ask him to," I replied, but my voice came out so small, it felt childish, even to my own ears. When my father came home that evening, he didn't greet me. He walked past as if I were a chair or a stain on the wall he didn't have time to scrub away. At dinner, he spoke only to Jake. My name wasn't spoken once. After that, every meal felt like a tactical debrief. I wasn't cleared to attend. Jake was selected for advanced tactical training. My father announced one evening, his knife slicing cleanly through roast beef, as if cutting through enemy lines. Top of his class, my mother added her hand, squeezing Jake's wrist with quiet pride. It's comforting when your children find their purpose. I chewed my food slowly, mechanically. My jaw ached with the pressure of words I couldn't say. Across from me, my cousin Melanie tilted her head and asked with mock concern, "Still at that insurance job, Morgan?" I nodded. "Yes. Good benefits, I guess." She replied, her smile thin and smug. She didn't know that, while she filed court motions and bragged about junior partner offers, I was infiltrating black sites in Eastern Europe, under forged passports, intercepting kill orders before they reached their targets. She didn't know about the hours spent in freezing concrete rooms gathering intelligence, while men with blood under their nails begged for mercy. She didn't know that the only reason she slept safely in her suburban condo was because people like me kept shadows away from her doorstep. But none of that mattered, because in this room, in this family, I was nothing. At night, I lay awake listening to the house creak under the ocean winds, feeling its old bones shift and sigh. Through the thin walls, I could hear my father's voice as he spoke to Jake about tactics, discipline, legacy. His words were soft, almost loving. I pressed my fist to my chest, grinding knuckles against sternum, trying to quiet the ache inside. The next morning, I left before dawn for another deployment no one would ever know about. As I drove away, the house faded in my rearview mirror, a fortress I no longer tried to storm. I told myself it didn't matter, that their pride was a currency I didn't need to survive. But late at night in countries with no names under skies, lit only by distant tracer fire, I sometimes whispered into the darkness, "Dad, can you see me now?" But there was never an answer, only the hum of the radio in my ear and the cold metal of my rifle pressed against my cheek. People think the hardest part of special operations is the training. The runs until your lungs bleed, the underwater drills, where darkness swallows you whole, the endless days with no food or sleep, until your hands tremble and your vision flickers at the edges. But that's not true. The hardest part is coming home, because while you are out there, you become something else, a shadow with a pulse, a weapon with a mind, a ghost with orders. And when you return to clean sidewalks and grocery store lines, there's no place to put the things you've seen. My training began in a facility with no name carved into the forests of Virginia, behind fences topped with silent black cameras. Days started at 400 with runs carrying 50-pound packs through mud and frost, every muscle screaming in protest. But physical punishment was only the first layer. The real test came in windowless rooms, glowing with flickering screens, where we analyzed raw intelligence feeds, in real time forced to assess and execute decisions as alarms blared and simulated hostages screamed through speakers. For hours, we mapped insurgent networks in Syria, tracked Russian handlers in Eastern Europe, decrypted intercepted chatter from warlords in Africa, all under sleep deprivation, severe enough to blur the edges of reality. But failure wasn't an option, because someday these scenarios would be real, and real people would die if we hesitated. My instructor, Major Lawrence, watched me one afternoon as I restructured an entire intelligence grid in under 12 minutes, solving a puzzle that had stumped the unit for days. "Morgan," he said quietly, "your mind is a weapon. You see patterns where others see chaos. That will keep people alive." I carried those words with me through every deployment. When I slipped across borders with nothing but forged papers and encrypted comms. When I sat in crumbling safe houses in Aleppo, intercepting intelligence that prevented a mass casualty attack in Paris. When I crawled through drainage tunnels beneath Mogadishu to extract a hostage before dawn, prayer feeling the sewage seep through my torn uniform as rats scattered under my elbows. I learned to move like smoke, to think 3 layers deeper than the problem presented. My specialty became extracting critical intelligence from environments too dangerous for traditional assets. Once in Syria, our team was pinned down by mortar fire outside Raqqa. Communications were down, UAV support delayed. Command was preparing to abandon the operation, but I refused. I crawled to the highest exposed point, lay flat under sniper range, and recalibrated the radio relay myself, splicing wires with trembling fingers slick with blood from shrapnel cuts. I patched through coordinates just as a drone arrived overhead, turning our sure death into swift extraction. The debrief officer told me later my decision violated 3 protocols. He also told me it saved 12 lives. But none of these stories live beyond steel vaults and clearance levels my family could never imagine. When I was promoted to major, my mother was telling friends I just couldn't find direction. When I received a silver star in a silent ceremony underground, my father was bragging about Jake's new SEAL qualification. When I spent 72 hours awake tracking a rogue terror cell across 3 countries, my cousin Melanie sent me a LinkedIn invite to join her insurance company's Women in Business Mentorship program. Coming home was the worst mission of all. Each time I wore my cover story, like armor. I spoke of corporate compliance audits while my mind replayed raids in pitch-dark safe houses. I sat in family dinners nodding at Jake's stories about his elite military training, wanting to tell him his pain was real and valid, that SEALs and Special Ops were different wars, but the same darkness. But I said nothing, because my wars didn't exist. Sometimes late at night I would open the bottom drawer of my safe house locker and stare at the medals tucked in black boxes. Bronze Star with Valor, Silver Star, Joint Service Commendation. Each one a story of blood and dirt and bone-deep exhaustion. Each one a memory that kept people alive. I would trace the engraved letters with my thumb and whisper into the silent room. At least I know, because I did. I knew who I was, even if no one else ever would. But the mission that still wakes me screaming at 2 a.m. wasn't in Syria or Somalia. It was the night I was ordered to terminate an asset we had spent 6 months cultivating. A man with blood on his hands, yes, but also a father who showed me photos of his children hidden behind cracked phone glass under candlelight. My handler's voice came through the comms. "You know what to do, Raven." So I did. I pulled the trigger with surgical precision. His blood sprayed across the dirt floor, it's dark and silent. The intel we recovered saved over 100 lives. But no medal weighs heavier than the memory of his final gaze, a silent plea that I burned into the deepest shadows of who I am. Coming home was a mission I never trained for. Out there in the sand-blasted heat, pain was obvious. Pain screamed as bullets tore flesh, hissed, as blood spilled onto burning dirt throbbed, as you pressed gauze into mangled muscle, grinding your teeth against the black haze, threatening to swallow you. You learned to stitch wounds with shaking fingers under moonlight to inject morphine into your thigh, without flinching to yank shrapnel from your own body before infection claimed it all. But at home, pain was silent. It seeped into bone marrow, pulsed beneath veins, rotted hope from within. No battlefield medic could treat this. No medevac would arrive in the night to carry me away from my own decaying mind. At the dinner table, Jake sat regal in his crisp uniform seal trident, gleaming with righteous glory under the chandelier's sterile glow. My father carved turkey with surgical precision, each slice a salute to discipline. He beamed as he announced Jake's latest triumphs. Halo jumps at dawn, breaching operations off classified coasts, upcoming deployments to secret places where freedom was forged in violence. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears of patriotic pride, voice trembling as she whispered prayers for his protection. Even Melanie, perfect in her ivory sweater and diamond rings, clapped delicately, careful not to spill her Chardonnay. And me? I sat small in my civilian blouse, hair pulled back to hide the ragged scar curving behind my ear, a permanent souvenir from a botched extraction in Aleppo. I cut my turkey into sterile cubes, chewing without tasting, nodding, whenever someone's gaze landed on me like a question mark. So, Morgan, Melanie drawled, swirling her wine eyes, flicking over my cheap earrings. Still at the insurance company, I forced a polite smile. Yes, good benefits. She nodded, lips curving in faux sympathy. At least you're stable. Stable. That word detonated inside my skull. Stable. As if the nights I woke strangled in sweat, clawing for my sidearm before my brain caught up with my bedroom ceiling were stable. As if the days I stared into coffee mugs, replaying operations, frame by frame hunting mistakes that never existed but still haunted me, were stable. As if the blood seared into my gloves, the smell of gunpowder fused to my hair, the metal taste of adrenaline I could never rinse from my tongue, was stability. They didn't see the men I ended in windowless basements, my fingers pressed to triggers their final gasps, echoing in candlelit silence. They didn't see the drone strike I called in, watching grainy footage of bodies turning to shadow and dust. They didn't see the little girl with obsidian eyes I carried from rubble, her tiny chest crushed her last heartbeat, fluttering against my ribs like a dying bird. They never saw the medals locked away in vaults, citations stamped, classified, my name engraved in metal, that would never hang on any wall, that would never explain who I was or why I couldn't look in a mirror anymore without tasting acid. All they saw was the daughter who never measured up, the sister who failed to shine, the insurance clerk with no ambition. Sometimes I fantasized about slamming my palms onto that table, shaking their wine glasses with my rage, and screaming the truth until my throat tore open. I am a colonel in Air Force. Special operations. I have killed for you. I have bled for you. I have sacrificed my soul to keep this flag unsoiled. I am more than this empty mask, you see. But I never did, because my missions demanded silence. My survival required shadows. And my family. My family needed a version of me they could understand, a watered-down lie that scalded my throat every time I spoke it. So I sat there nodding at Jake's stories, swallowing my truth. Like poison, letting their praise for him drown out the dying screams that haunted me. Because in the end, the battlefield taught me everything about staying alive. But coming home was a death of its own. But what my family never knew, what no one in my command ever suspected, was that the man I killed in that candlelit basement wasn't a stranger. Intelligence identified him as a mid-level operative smuggling weapons through Aleppo. But when I stepped into that crumbling room, rifle-raised torch beam cutting through dust and darkness, he turned and I saw his face. It was Elias, my first love at the academy, the boy who taught me how to fire from prone position, who whispered dreams of special operations under starlit training fields, who kissed me once behind the old radar tower and said, "We'll conquer the world together." His eyes widened in shock and recognition. Morgan butt duty overrode memory. Orders thundered in my phone. I pulled the trigger. His body crumpled against the dirt wall, blood soaking through his shirt like ink spreading through paper. For months after I woke choking on silent screams. In each mirror I passed, I saw his blood on my hands. That mission saved lives. That mission destroyed mine. The day it all came out was bright and blue, the kind of California morning where the sun is almost cruel in its perfect brilliance, as if mocking the darkness coiled tight inside my chest. I arrived late for Jake's SEAL pin ceremony, slipping into the back seat invisible in my civilian clothes. My hair was tied back in a regulation bun, my posture straight, despite my jeans and soft linen blouse. Old habits die hard. My eyes scanned the exits, assessing the direction of threat, watching the uniformed guards stationed under fluttering American flags, even here amid the families waving small banners and wiping away tears. My mind raced through the tactical overlays with mechanical precision. On stage, my brother stood tall and unbreakable, his SEAL trident pinned to his chest. His jaw was clenched with quiet pride. His eyes forward, his shoulders square, under the invisible weight of what he had survived to earn that badge. Despite everything, despite the silence and the cold years between us, my chest tightened with fierce, aching love. He was my brother. He was a warrior. He deserved every cheer, every salute, every tear shed in his honor. Then the movement on stage caught my attention. Admiral Wilson. The last time I saw him, we were standing knee-deep in Syrian mud under a howling mortar barrage, while I patched through the final target coordinates on a jammed communications relay. He was one of the few people who knew my true rank, my true mission, the entire classified biography, hidden behind my lowly insurance agent veneer. Now his sharp eyes scanned the crowd, reading faces with the swift precision of a man who had hunted rebels in the mountain passes at dawn. For a lucky second, I thought I was invisible. Then his gaze locked on mine. Recognition exploded like an incendiary grenade. First confusion, then certainty, then something else, respect mixed with disbelief. My pulse pounded in my ears. "Please," I begged silently. "Not here. Not now." But some truths were too heavy to bury. As the ceremony ended, families rushed forward in a wave of cheers, tears, and relieved sobs. I tried to slip away, weaving through the clusters of mothers and children clutching plastic flags. I was 3 steps from the exit when a voice cut through the noise like a sniper's shot. "Colonel Blake!" I stopped mid-sentence. The world around me seemed to have gone silent in a ringing silence. I turned slowly. Admiral Wilson stood in his full uniform, flanked by officers with ribbons and badges of rank. His eyes fixed on me with steely determination. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, his voice rising to carry over the crowd. "Last I heard, you were coordinating counter-terrorism operations in the Gulf." My father's head jerked. My mother's hand went to her chest, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. Jake turned frowning under his white uniform. "Colonel," my father said hoarsely. Admiral Wilson glanced at him, reading the terror and the dawning pride in his voice. The realization softened the lines around his mouth. "They don't know," he muttered almost to himself. Then louder, with the full authority of a man who had commanded fleets and assaulted shores. Your daughter is a colonel in the Air Force Special Forces. Her intelligence work has saved countless lives. Her bravery is known to generals you will never meet." The words hit my family like a cannonball. The silence that followed was deafening, swallowing every other sound. Shock spread across their faces, disbelief melting into truth, recognition collapsing into something raw and painful. My father stared at me, as if seeing me for the first time. His jaw moved silently before he hoarsely said, Colonel Jake took a lurching step forward, his sealed trident, glinting in the sunlight. "Morgan, is this true?" I met his eyes, my brother, the child I had carried across tide pools, the boy who had grown into a man forged by weeks of ocean hell and midnight dives. My chest burned with truths that had been buried for so long. "Yes," I said softly, but the words cracked like a rifle shot. "Yes." The sky did not crack, the ground did not split beneath my feet. But in that suspended moment, my entire universe had shifted on its axis. For 17 years, I had walked through their lives as a ghost, an echo of failure and wasted potential. Now, in 3 sentences, my cover story crumbled to dust beneath my feet. I deserved forced a nod, my voice steady, even as my soul trembled. "Thank you, Captain." Around us, the world spun on. Families embraced photographers, shouted instructions. Children squealed with laughter as they climbed on fathers' backs. But in that small circle of revelation, time fractured the daughter they thought they lost, or stood before them not broken, but reforged in shadows into something harder than steel. Because that morning, under the cruel, perfect sun, the girl they once dismissed died forever, and in her place stood a warrior unmasked at last. That night after dinner, sleep refused me like an old enemy. I sat alone on the narrow balcony of my temporary quarters, knees drawn up to my chest overlooking silent city streets, bathed in sodium orange glow. The breeze was cool against my skin, carrying with it the distant smell of salt and asphalt and dying flowers. My uniform hung pressed and immaculate on the closet door, its insignias catching stray shadows in the dim lamplight. My deployment bag sat by the entryway, packed tight checklist, completed twice over zippers locked with practiced finality. There was nothing left to do but wait. Wait for dawn. Wait for orders. Wait to step back into the life that had become my second skin. I thought about my family, the stunned silence at that dinner table still ringing in my ears. I thought about Jake's eyes wide with fierce pride, shadowed by a flicker of guilt, as if he'd spent years guarding a throne that never belonged to him alone. I thought about my mother's trembling hands clenching her wine glass, so tight I feared it would shatter, as if she could freeze the moment before everything changed forever. I thought about my father's voice rough with unshed tears and unsaid apologies calling me colonel for the first time in his life. I thought about the years I spent in shadows, letting their disappointment grind me into something sharper, harder, deadlier. How their scorn had become fuel, a bitter accelerant I burned to propel myself deeper into a world they could never imagine. And now, standing revealed in their light, felt almost blinding, unbearable. For a single fractured moment, I let myself imagine another life, one where I graduated the academy with honors in plain sight, where I wore navy whites like my father and Jake, where my name was announced proudly in family circles instead of whispered in classified war rooms under red lights and encrypted comms. One where I sat in sunlit offices by wide windows, coffee steaming beside neat stacks of paperwork, my only battles waged in budgets and quarterly projections. One where I laughed easily at crowded dinner tables, never needing to measure each word for operational security, never waking in darkness to phantom screams and the smell of burning flesh clinging to my hair. But that life was never mine. It was a fairy tale written in someone else's handwriting. My life was shadowed corridors and blast-proof briefing rooms. It was learning to breathe through pain until the trigger broke under my finger. It was secrets locked so deep no prayer could unearth them. It was whispers of love, unsaid friendships, forged in blood and final breaths, and memories so black they burned themselves white. And I chose it. Every single day I chose it again. Below, somewhere in the city's sleeping veins, a car hissed past tires, whispering secrets to wet asphalt. A stray cat darted across the street, its silhouette swallowed by darkness, before I could track its path. I watched until nothing moved but my own breath ghosting out in pale ribbons under the cold dawn air. Finally, I stood feeling every pop and ache of tired bones as I stretched against the balcony railing. The city lay silent and indifferent beneath me, unaware of the war machine perched above it, bracing to vanish once more into its unseen battlefields. I walked inside, flicking off the balcony light, and sat on the edge of my cot. My eyes drifted to the clock's glowing digits, counting down the 2 hours I had left before deployment briefing. 2 hours to sleep, 2 hours to exist as a human being instead of an asset. Tomorrow the war would reclaim me. Tomorrow I would once again become ghost weapon, guardian monster. But tonight, for this final quiet breath between worlds, I was just Morgan. No rank, no cover story, no mission. Just a woman alone under a silent city sky, relearning the fragile shape of her own existence, one broken heartbeat at a time. Then I lay down, closed my eyes against the encroaching dawn, and surrendered to the darkness that felt more like home than any place I had ever known. 6 months later, I stood ramrod straight under sterile fluorescent lights as the silver stars of Brigadier General were affixed to my uniform. The promotion ceremony was small, hidden behind layers of security clearances and armored doors. No press, no speeches for public morale, just a tight cluster of officers with eyes sharpened by years of secrets and sleep, sacrificed on the altar of silent wars. Men and women who understood exactly what it cost to stand where I stood. But this time, 3 seats in the family section were filled. My father sat rigid in his navy dress blues, his posture a carved monument of pride and regret. His eyes gleamed, and for the first time in my life, that gleam wasn't shadowed with disappointment. My mother dabbed tears with a silk handkerchief embroidered with my initials, MGEB, her shoulders trembling with each silent sob. Jake sat between them in his SEAL uniform, his trident glinting under the stark overhead light. When our eyes met, he gave me that crooked half-smile, the same one he flashed at 5 years old when sneaking an extra cookie behind Mom's back. Afterward, as the officers dispersed to classified debriefs and urgent deployments, my family approached in hesitant silence. My mother stepped forward first, her hand trembling, as she reached out to brush the silver star pinned above my heart. Her fingers hovered there, barely touching polished metal, as if it might burn her skin. "I always knew you were exceptional," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of truth. I didn't know how." I swallowed hard, feeling tears prick, and threatened to breach the dam I'd built over too many years. "I know," I said, softly. My father extended his hand. His grip was firm, calloused from decades at sea, his thumb pressing hard against my knuckles like an unspoken apology. "Well done, General Blake," he rasped, but my title broke his voice in two. "Thank you, Captain," I replied with quiet precision. Then, to my shock, he pulled me into an embrace so fierce, I felt the tremble of his shoulders against mine, the silent quake of a man who had finally seen the warrior his daughter had become. That night, we ate dinner together at a quiet oceanside restaurant. No strategic debates, no operational secrecy, just conversation. Real conversation about memories we shared and futures we no longer feared to speak of. Jake asked me about my next deployment. I told him what I could. The country was classified, the mission darker still. But his eyes held only understanding, never judgment. "Be safe," he said softly, reaching across the table to squeeze my wrist, his thumb brushing over the faint surgical scar that peeked from under my cuff. "You too," I replied, pressing his hand back, feeling the silent pulse of love and steel that bound us as siblings and soldiers. Later, when we returned to my parents' house, my mother led me into my old room. It looked almost unchanged. Pale blue walls, academy posters curling at the edges, bookshelves, lined with volumes on naval tactics, asymmetric warfare, counterinsurgency strategy. But in one corner she had created a small shrine. My academy acceptance letter, my midshipman photo, and now a formal portrait of me in my general's uniform. A single candle flickered beside it, scenting the room with lavender and cedarwood. "Is it okay?" she asked softly, hesitant tears brimming. "I wanted to honor you. I made sure nothing here is classified." I swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in my chest. "It's perfect," I whispered. Later, I stood alone on the back porch, the dark ocean crashing against black cliffs beyond the lawn. The wind cut cold against my cheeks, tasting of salt and ghosted tides. My father stepped outside beside me, hands clasped behind his back in that old naval stance, shoulders broad under the faint silver of his hair. For a long moment he said nothing. Only the waves spoke. Finally, he cleared his throat voice, low and rough as gravel. "I've been thinking," he began, words dragging heavy with memory, "about all those years we misjudged you." I stayed silent, letting the night cradle his confession. "It wasn't fair," he continued, his voice shaking. "You carried the weight of the world, while we made you carry our disappointment too." I turned to look at him, the man who had shaped my world with both love and iron, whose shadow I had trained to outrun. "It's over now," I said quietly. He shook his head. "No," he murmured, staring out at the black horizon. "It will never be over, but we will never doubt you again." When I went back inside, I closed my eyes, breathing deep the wind and salt and the distant cries of gulls returning to darkened cliffs. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not because the burden was gone, it never would be, but because I no longer carried it alone. In the early hours before deployment, I stood in front of the narrow mirror in my temporary quarters, adjusting the new insignia on my uniform. My reflection stared back, dark eyes, steady shoulders, squared mouth, set with the quiet ferocity of a woman forged rather than broken by the wars she carried inside her. And for the first time, I let myself whisper the truth out loud into the silent room. I am Morgan Blake, Brigadier General, daughter, sister, soldier, shadow, light. Then I turned away from the mirror, picked up my deployment bag, and stepped out into the bruised purple dawn, ready to walk once more into darkness, knowing that this time when I returned, there was finally a home that saw not just my silence, but the fierce, unbreakable truth of who I truly am. People ask me if I regret it, if I regret the silence, if I regret the weight of secrets that carved valleys through my life, if I regret becoming a shadow when I could have been light. And sometimes in the quiet hours between missions, I wonder too. I wonder who I might have been if I'd chosen the visible path, if my name had been announced proudly at academy graduations, if my family had watched me pin rank to my shoulders under bright summer skies, instead of discovering the truth in whispered shock years later. But then I remember I was never meant for the light. I was meant for the hidden corridors of power, where wars are ended before they begin. I was meant to move unseen, to speak only when it mattered, to hold silence, like a blade against the throats of those who would harm innocence. I was meant to carry truths so heavy they would crush those who didn't choose them willingly. People ask me if I regret it, if I regret the silence, if I regret the weight of secrets that carved valleys through my life, if I regret becoming a shadow when I could have been light. And sometimes in the quiet hours between missions, I wonder too. I wonder who I might have been if I'd chosen the visible path, if my name had been announced proudly at academy graduations, if my family had watched me pin rank to my shoulders under bright summer skies, instead of discovering the truth in whispered shock years later. But then I remember I was never meant for the light. I was meant for the hidden corridors of power where wars are ended before they begin. I was meant to move unseen, to speak only when it mattered, to hold silence, like a blade against the throats of those who would harm innocence. I was meant to carry truths so heavy they would crush those who didn't choose